Oh, hello. This is also a rerun, which you heard Aaron speak last week. In this episode, one of our favorites, I guess, just because it highlights how weird we are, Aaron had another existential crisis after watching the movie Soul, and he was exploring the concept of purpose with us. And I was hanging out in my nerd corner, reading about UFO tranches. UAPs now. God, that's what they're called. It's like catch up. Anyways, this rerun of Critical Nonsense was fun from earlier this year. I hope you are having a lovely New Year's Eve, and I hope 2022 brings you tidings of good aliens. Enjoy. Woo! Oh, hello. This is what Joey sounds like. This is Joey. This is what he sounds like.
Baramu. This is what an Aaron sounds like today. Yeah.
And this is what an executive producer in Clementine, Jess Vander, sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess.
I like clementines. They're good.
What you didn't get to hear is I was going to open the show with me attempting to sing a Coldplay song because it will in turn relate to Aaron's topic. And I started and I was reminded, oh wait, no, you don't have the range. And so
disagree.
I abandoned aggressively my singing of the song. Yeah, that was what happened.
But Joey, you are beyond the range. You are the range. You are the home on the range.
Oh my
goodness. That is it. Do we have any housekeeping this week?
I don't think so. Rate, review, subscribe all of your friends. Go on your friends' phones on Spotify or wherever they listen to podcasts and subscribe to the show.
No, you can't do that
them.
because danger.
Oh, but Carrier Pigeon can go on the window, steal the phone, get it back to you, poke on it, and then an owl can take it back to your friend. Rate, review, subscribe as possible. Hoot.
Oh, hey, question. Sorry.
Yeah,
something very important. Listening to an owl on a walk the other day, and I thought, who decided that hoot is the sound an owl makes? It's much more like doo.
Yes.
I
agree with this wholeheartedly.
Doo. And I was like, DOOH. Who decided HOOT? That is just, I don't
They're
understand.
wrong. No, they're fundamentally wrong.
That's right. Wow. I
No,
really
man,
feel
yeah.
seen. Okay.
Well, my vision means nothing, but I'm with you.
Heard maybe like an owl. Okay.
I like this in particular because it does not relate to my topic, but it is a really good segue to Joey's. So listener, hold on to that one because you're going to want it in particular.
You might want to send it back. You may return it, but stay tuned.
Stay tuned. So I have a slightly different question.
Okay. Non-owl related.
It may not be owl related, but we'll see. I know I miss all the owls in the universe. They're a great bird. So have you guys seen Disney Pixar's Soul by chance?
Yes.
Yeah.
What else would we be doing with our time?
That's exactly. Aaron, what do you think we've been up to?
No, this is true. It's just on a loop in the background at home for both of you. I watched it last weekend too, and I'm glad that you guys have watched it, even though you have. Light spoiler
Important question:
alert.
how much did you cry?
I did not cry as much as I did during Inside Out. It did not really make me tear. Yeah. Did you guys cry? Did you guys? No.
I got wispy. No, that's not a word. Misty. That's what I meant to say. But I was able to hold it in. No spoilers.
Yeah.
Actually.
Well, maybe some spoilers.
Okay. So
Light
actually,
spoilers.
wait, housekeeping. This is maybe a spoiler alert because we might be about to talk a little bit about Soul.
Bango.
If you don't want to hear this, the timestamps in the show notes, you can jump ahead and then return my segment.
About owls. It's an owl-related segment.
It's not.
I love
That's so good, Aaron. Okay.
Thank you.
We digress.
So, for anyone who hasn't heard about what it's about. It's literally a movie about Jamie Foxx as a jazz pianist who has a near-death experience and gets stuck in the afterlife. And he's contemplating his choices and regretting the existence that he mostly took for granted. Thank you, RogerEbert.com. And the movie itself, just like every Pixar movie, is amazing at wrapping up bigger adult questions in a tidy child box, And the big one that really comes up in the movie, amongst many, is about purpose. It's about like what are we here for? What are we here to do? And we've been talking a lot about purpose, in particular in the context of like businesses and brands over the past few years. And it's been defined in a very, very potentially myopic way. That's your light spoiler for the film. So it leads me to a question about purpose itself. I'm wondering, for my Midnight Society that is with me right here, right now, how does air quotes purpose lead us astray?
The first part, right, is that there is one, right? Like the assumption that everything has some kind of purpose. And aside from soul and beyond, I just was like, as a precursor to the bigger question, how do y'all feel about the idea that purpose is a thing that is destined?
Ooh, Joey, you go.
I think it's interesting from. It fits in like some of the conversations that we've had about happiness. I feel like I would put it in that same camp of like purpose is at least maybe currently culturally in the same category of sort of import or aspiration of like pursuing purpose in the same way that people pursue happiness, but in the way that when you start to dig in, and we've talked about happiness a lot in other episodes and psychological studies on it, is the like it isn't what everyone thinks it is, or like the outcomes of the pursuit of that thing is not what it's cracked up to be. Like in the case of happiness, it seems like being like comfortable or satisfied is actually a better pursuit than pursuing happiness and like trying to all like be in one perpetual moment of happiness. And purpose feels sort of like the similar way. Like we've elevated it to this thing, to your point, just like everything has to have a purpose, and that makes sense from like intentionality perspective of like, are you doing things intentional? But the idea that there is some sort of like grander metaphysical purpose to everything, to me feels, is it maybe dangerous? Like that idea that like if you don't have a purpose in every thing that you're doing, that it's somehow lesser or less meaningful, or whatever else.
Or that there could be a purpose, but you just aren't aware of it. Like, one thing that I think is interesting about this question is trying to wrangle, find, identify, call out, and somehow sort of capture purpose in some way. And like, it is a thing, and I know it, and I have it, and it only exists insofar as I know that. But even to what you're describing about the danger of trying to aim for purpose is that then you are assuming that is something that you can aim for, or that that's something that you can identify or know, when maybe you can't for whatever reason.
Yeah, and there are a lot of things baked into that assumption that we can know it. It assumes that, like, that there will be intention behind it, or like that there will be, intention behind it. That it will reason. There will be action, like that. It's not something that actually exists in the ether. It is something that is in motion. It's actually a verb, not a noun. There's a lot of those things that are kind of laced into it, and I think that it overlooks the fact that like chaos can be a purpose, like, or a lack of purpose weirdly can be a purpose. And it's only when we like ascribe all these other definitions to it that we start to say, oh, no, that can't be a purpose. Like, it's not higher order enough. It's not socially conscious enough, whatever the case may be.
Yeah, this also feels like a very, like, it makes so much sense coming from Pixar because it's so integral to story writing, I feel like. The idea of, like, Joey, is that your vehicle?
Yeah, sorry, I'm in apparently severe traffic.
I think you're the one that moved to LA in this moment, which is very interesting.
Very confused.
Yeah.
It's the rage of a New Yorker and just transporting the vehicles from Los Angeles. But what I was saying is this idea that there are, you know, when trying to write a good character in a story or like tell a good story, something I've been talking about with my boyfriend a lot is this idea of, for our Dungeons and Dragons characters, like, I know this is so nerdy, but like how to figure out like what motivates them, like what drives them, like what's the reason behind some of these things. And my character is really confusing because it's like she's like a sociopath. And so so it's like, I don't know how to explain this other than just like, there's no reason, or like, is that just an excuse for not having a good story? And how much of that can we actually apply to real life? Like, it's one thing if you create a purpose for something when you are in control of that narrative, but when it's ongoing, like life and people, it's harder to wrangle.
Yeah, there's like two things that you guys are making me think about, and I think one is something we talked a little bit about, Aaron, when you were talking in the prognostications about the veggie patty apocalypse or however we described it. It is like
plant-based.
I think
go on.
What did you say?
It was plant-based, but go on.
Plant-based apocalypse, right? Is in that like purity test vein. I think a lot of times this idea of purpose can get reconfigured into being some form of like external validation for how or why you do things, which feels not right. And the other part of this that, you know, that's something you said, Q, to me, Jess, is when you think about the way a lot of people talk about purpose, it is sort of like integrated into some like higher order thing. Mm-hmm. And it just seems unfair to place that level of expectation on yourself, to not only imbue every action that you have with some consistent and deliberate purpose, but also that you would be able to see the larger system so well that you could understand your role in it and navigate that. That part just feels like unfair to you as like an individual to like place that kind of burden on yourself.
Wait, so side note on that, what is enlightenment then?
That was like my ears just like, what? Qua?
I feel like transcendence, right? Like oftentimes when you talk about that is like rising above even like the demand for purpose. It you know, when someone like achieves nirvana, it is sort of like comfort in your place within the system, independent of needing to know or exert yourself upon the system, right? Like that's like my non-educated interpretation of like exposure over my lifetime to those concepts.
Right, or maybe in more pop culture terms, it's like if you were on the Meg Cabot train when the Princess Diaries series books were being released, and every book, if you ever read, the movies don't do justice to this thread throughout the series, but it's all about Mia Thermopolis, the heroine, trying to achieve self-actualization, and all of the books are her journaling about her life, and is constantly questioning, like, did I do it yet? Am I self-actualized yet? Like, did I find it? Have I, you know, now that I've lived more and I've grown up more, you know, am I done?
So it just clicked that the Princess Diaries were like the
Literally
motif of the book
diaries.
makes sense. Yes, I'm like, oh, I want to read those now. Love Anne Hathaway, but I'm really curious to read what it was actually written as. But the other thing is that like this is such a ripe topic because it's always been talked about. Like, yes, that's very recent. Even that's recent. But this idea of life is about the journey, not the destination, is in some ways what a lot of the flip side of that moral comes into, where like if you're like sprinting through purpose, stop trying to focus on like the impact of like this huge gargantuan impact, but instead appreciate that you're a human being, not a human doing. Appreciate that you are, I'm going to come up with every cliche that I can, but like
every fridge magnet.
Yes. But this is something that we struggle with we just struggle with this over and over and over again. I understand why we struggle with it now, but why are we so bad at being able to do that? To just be.
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting to think about this from that, like, this is an old story being told new, or you know, like that we think it's a new story. Like as you were saying that, I was thinking about like Erik Erikson's stages of psychosocial development and like this middle-aged idea of like generativity versus stagnation, right? Like, did you create something? Like that is sort of the crisis that you enter into in your like middle adulthood. Like, have I made a thing? Am I creating, or am I, you know, nothing? Or, you know, the idea of, like you were saying, like self-actualization or enlightenment or nirvana or transcendence. Like, so many of those ideas are like things that we're perpetually struggling with. But it comes back to me to like expectation. Like how clearly are you solidifying your expectation for outcomes that are going to happen in your life, and the result of dissatisfaction when the outcomes don't exactly mirror what your expectation is, right? Like that idea of purpose to me can form a sort of rigid expectation of your future or your impact or specific outcomes. And it feels impossible to be able to, again, like that idea of like you existing in a system and everyone in and around you and luck and opportunity and all of those other things fitting into it. And so like purpose in my mind like starts to like form rigidity in your expectations.
Totally. It's about being able to then to have a baseline of consistency, to be like, oh, well, if this is my purpose, then these things, right? Like, then it makes a ton of sense why this is happening and I'm on this road. And I was having a conversation with Katie Sato this morning about how when you realize that most decisions are actually not finite, it's very scary because all of a sudden you're like, I don't actually have to keep making consistent choices if I don't want to. Like, if you're on the purpose path to become a hockey player, you could at any time switch purpose paths and become a
turtle
sugar
rancher or sugar person.
A Jolly Rancher, did you just say?
A turtle rancher, but I think Jolly Rancher is much more logical. Thank you. It's so much better. Well, what I think one of the things that all of this clicks for me, and it dovetails exactly with what you said before, Jess, about like developing characters, whether it's for D&D or even just in like kind of basic screenwriting when you're doing a character breakdown. Purpose animates us. Purpose, like internally and externally, gives us some sort of trajectory, and it gives us it does that thing to like give what otherwise actually is infinite chaos structure that we can like move forward in. And
it's hard.
Crave that.
Yeah, it's hard to think about. I think so much of the conversation, at least how it's introduced, and because of soul, I was thinking of it on an individual basis, right? Like as me as a person, what do I need to determine as my purpose in life or in the world or in a group or whatever, and that can feel unfair. What's interesting is so much of our work revolves around helping organizations determine, whether we're talking about purpose of an individual initiative or larger company purpose, is around creating coherence in larger groups of things. Like you're saying, right? Like this, there is chaos, and as soon as you're like 3-body problem, right? Like as soon as you have 3 bodies orbiting around each other, the predictability of the orbits like becomes nearly impossible. And then you look at a company with 40,000 people or something, that happens. And so much of what we're trying to do in those instances is try to like be chaos reduction. And so in the way, like on an individual basis, is it about, right? Like that's why at the beginning when I was talking about intentionality, this idea of at least saying, like, am I making a decision for something that feels coherent to me, as opposed to sort of, and that's where like values come in. Like, what do I believe in the world? Like, what do I think is just and fair and right, versus a purpose. Oftentimes when we think about, like, I was born to play music or right, or I was born to do X, Y, or Z. Like, I've never felt anything resembling that, I don't think. Like, I don't have that sort of singular passion, but I do have values. Like, I believe in being fair and just and kind and like playful and things like that. And so I can still engage in an individual decision without having to have like that linearity of path,
Yeah, I think that's part of the room to answer the original question of like, where does this take us astray? It's when, if something doesn't fit, like especially because purpose is compounding, like the more expectation you build up, it's like, oh, that's weird though. Like, why that thing that doesn't fit over there? Like that doesn't make any sense at all. When that could make sense in some other picture you can't see. It's just, given what you're looking at, maybe not. And from an individual basis to maybe an organizational basis, trying to make sense of the extra thing and to figure out like which track is it on, which path is it on, is it even on a path, is there a new path? It's hard, but also I think you're right, Joey. That might be what is part of why we get hired to do this.
It's so
coherence.
Coherence.
So I want to talk about this for 4 more hours, but I actually think that I see Run DMC running into the room here, and they're asking for Jess's wrap up corner. Hoot, hoot, doo, doo.
That was terrible and beautiful. It was just both of those things at once. It doesn't have to be coherent.
Story of my memoir. Title of my memoir. I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm trying, but I don't know. Really.
Oh, I've got it. I can help you, Jess. I'm here with you. The wrap-up corner is, why are we here? To be here.
This is water. This is water.
This is water. I wish that the audience could see the face that Jessica gave, which is, come on, what?
There's the reference in Soul about like the fish looking for the ocean and said, you're in the ocean. And said, I don't want to be in water. I want to be in the ocean. I think it was like a play off of David Foster Wallace's This Is Water, where one goldfish says to the other something about water, and he's like, this is water. And it was this idea of like, effectively about sort of like being present, right? Like you're in a moment, and when you get mad at someone at the grocery store or you're mad in traffic, like remind yourself, this is water. I'm here in this moment. I'm present, and this moment is passing, and the next moment will come, and you don't have to necessarily be looking for something outside of yourself. We're all out here looking to find our way. And on that path, we could all use a little bit of guidance. You turn the page of the newspaper to your zodiac sign. What does it mean? And does it give me anything about what I can do with my day? It's time that you picked up your phone and dialed 1-800-PERP-PERP-PERP and talked to Sir Purple Purpose, because he can help you find your path to transcendence.
Hello? Welcome to your purpose?
Hey Perp, I just graduated college and I'm looking to figure out what to do with my life. I just don't know what my purpose is.
Yes? Something is coming to me. I can see purple. I also see some rayon fabric. It's very silky, very, very viscose. Your purpose? Eating bandanas?
Hey Perp, I'm getting married at the end of the month and I was just wondering if you had any guidance around the purpose of my relationship?
Money. Your purpose and marriage is cleaning McDongles. Clean all those McDongles. Yes, they must be clean.
So, my marriage is McDonald's?
Get tidy. Thank you very much. Yes, that's right.
How much did this cost? So if you need a little push to get on your high horse and ride through the mountains of purpose, you're in the right place. Call 1-800-PERP-PERP-PERP and find your path.
I can see printer cartridges. Your toner is low.
I feel like we need to talk to whoever is placing these ads.
Yeah, no, I know. Our budget is going, I think, to the right places, but man, it's getting weird.
It has consistently been weird.
Yeah. Like maybe is it just like that? Like our purchasing algorithm is off. I don't know.
It has to be.
Yeah.
I mean, it says something about whoever is listening to this show. I think
that is true.
It's targeting. You guys, I mean, we're already here. We're riding the crazy train.
Truth.
We're going off the rails on that crazy train. I wanted to talk to you guys about something that I think is interesting and also weird. And just as a primer, this is maybe only interesting to me and not interesting to either of you, and we will find out.
We will. I like this. Yes.
I've talked about this a lot on episodes in the past of like my guilty pleasure of like, it's not like Roni or like reality TV or things like my guilty pleasure is like sci-fi and like UFO documentary types of things. I just like, I have no idea whether I believe or don't believe. I just like enjoy the suspension of disbelief in that way of saying like, oh, aliens are real. That would be interesting if they are, like, and just sort of like exploring that path. But there's been an interesting sort of signal that I'm picking up on. I'm shimmying. You can't, listeners, tell that I'm shimmying.
Oh, they can hear.
Is this
an
alien signal?
Yeah, you can hear. There's an alien signal. Just good. My SETI radar is going off.
Nerd quotient up 5. I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm in.
Your what radar?
SETI, SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence.
Yes.
My Drake equation tattoo is actually glowing currently, a blue.
What's a Drake equation?
Drake equation is like a pseudoscientific equation where astrophysicists at like a conference just like entertain the idea of like, if alien intelligence was real, could we like make an equation to predict the likelihood that it would happen? And so there's a number of sort of variables that he uses in the equation to say like, what's the rate of star formation in the Milky Way? What's the rate of those stars that have planets? What's the number of those planets that are in the habitable zone, et cetera, et cetera. anyways, there has been a string of recent, like in January, UFO sightings that have made the news, which is, I guess, maybe not interesting necessarily by itself. What's interesting is that they're like hitting major, USA Today, like local news stations. They all have videos and like multiple witnesses. There was 3 lights in the sky that multiple people took videos of in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was a woman or a couple in Hawaii that saw this weird like blue light flying around. They called the police. They were on the phone with the police. Like the police, I believe, showed up and saw what they were seeing and were like, we have no idea what's going on here. There's a woman in LA who was driving. TMZ broke the story, which maybe pushes it into tabloid territory, but there are photos and they did their like photo search of it. What's interesting to me though is, why is this happening now, right? Like in a month that like several stories are sort of breaking where there's like a bunch of witnesses, a bunch of evidence. And over the past few years, the conversation has sort of shifted from being one that like wasn't talked about to one that has been in places like the New York Times. There's been a massive like tranche of declassified information about UFO sightings from the US military. And it just feels like suddenly the thing that had been pushed into like a stigmatized conversation of like a thing you can't talk about for fear of seeming like a crazy person is now being spoken about in, I guess, like in quotes, normal circles, or in the places where information is given credence. And so my question for you guys is, when does or how does something move from a stigmatized thing into something that you could talk about in polite company?
One of the reasons why I find this fascinating first is about like the moment in which all of these ones are happening. A lot of what you're talking about. I think that our relationship collectively with possible and real has been like a frog boiling in water until last year when the frog exploded. Like, we had murder hornets, a global pandemic, the Capitol's getting stormed, QAnon, pick your crazy thing, Pizzagate. Like, the idea of conspiracy, the ideas that are all wrapped around in this, distrust of authority, the sort of blossoming that anything really is possible, the things that you believed were impossible are being just like blown up again and again and again. It makes sense to me that some of these stories, just for the sake of like tapping into that feeling that viewers have who are watching the news of, I guess anything is possible at this point, they'll say, sure, there's an obelisk that shows up in the desert made of metal. Yep, it could be alien. Like, at this point, like, who knows? But I think the other thing, which is probably the more direct answer to your question, how things move from this taboo or like stigmatized space to the non-stigmatized space, is that it requires an entity of power or authority to relinquish control of some sort. Whether it is a government entity that's going to declassify enough files such that people can then look at them, or it is a group that no longer, like, whose values have changed and they no longer, shit on people who espouse a certain belief regardless of what that belief is. All of a sudden, the merits of the idea get discussed and the thoughts underneath it, rather than it getting dismissed as cockamamie malarkey.
For instance, the thing no one's talking about right now, which is how are owls related to this conversation?
There was a really good reason, and I can't remember. There was a really strong connection.
No idea.
It was really good. It'll come back to me, I swear. I swear.
Yeah, I mean there's something about this like pot boiling thing that I think is interesting that you're saying, right? Over the past 10 years or whatever. I think there was Harry Reid at the beginning part of the last decade, the then Senate Majority Leader was having public conversations about declassification of alien information, UFOs, UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, apparently is what the military calls it now. And you know, this person in the seat of power, right? Like the head of the Senate at the time was saying like these things need to be declassified and pushing for it. Then when Hillary Clinton ran in 2016, her and Dave Podesta, her campaign manager and sort of like right-hand person, were pushing for saying like if Hillary Clinton is elected president, we're going to be pushing for declassification of this information. You had like Joe Rogan talking about this. One of the people that was released in that tranche of military information was a Navy pilot off the coast of Southern California who had witnessed one of these, you know, UAPs. But then in that tranche also, like, so you had all these people who had a certain level of credibility, right? Like they weren't, you know, sort of outliers in society, or sort of like that they didn't fit into this vision that had been sort of planted in people's heads that it, you know, kooks, people with like tinfoil hats and antennas sticking out of like every part of their house or something like that. And then with that tranche of information, there was also videos, right? Like video from like a US military fighter jet, like tracking an object that the military had no idea what it was, or at least publicly was saying they had no idea what it was, but was like on like a FLIR camera on, you know, a $16 billion jet or however much one of these, you know, F-16s or F-22s cost. And all of a sudden it's like, well, that's real. And they put this out and they don't want to, like, all of a sudden that conversation shifts and there's like a credibility reevaluation.
Yeah, I mean, it seems as though there's there's like so many different pieces here. There's like, why do these things get more airtime now? Sort of what you were saying in the beginning. And I think that entertainment factor of like people, not in terms of like media and entertainment, people are entertaining more ideas more seriously that were further flung. And that's a mixture of the things that are observably wild that have happened in the past year, but also the sort of rapid rate of open conspiracy theories that a lot of fringe groups are now allowing to be considered on mainstream news. It's becoming common to hear a lot of these things through sources that could accidentally legitimize them simply by mentioning them. Then there's a second thread, which is what the purpose of making some of these conversations legitimate is. Sometimes when I think about the Harry Reids and I think about during the Clinton not administration, but her running for president, there was an opportunity in declassifying a lot of these things and bringing people out from classified spaces to instill more trust in the electorate, to make them feel like there is more transparency in activities that had previously been hidden. And that also seems like it's a very specific tactic. And I don't know, I mean, both of those actually touch on how like there has to be, and there is, whether knowingly or unknowingly or intentionally or unintentionally, there are puppet masters behind all of this to try to spark certain conversations because certain conditions will allow that conversation to flourish. And there are those actors who are there to benefit from those conversations flourishing in some way. It could simply be to fill a couple minutes on the news, but it could also be to destabilize a democracy, to be a little bit tinfoily hatty myself.
Okay, but to play devil's advocate, classic. A dark side of shutting down a curiosity like that is super obvious in, say, the academic sphere, where you know, it's not even worth studying that or running that experiment because we're not going to get funding for it. It's just like people aren't interested in that. And there's something positive, I think, about the idea that I hope in some elements this is true, or what you're suggesting might be an upward trend, Joey, of more opportunity to just try something wild and then see if nothing comes of it. Okay, then nothing comes of it, and let's not, make a mountain out of a molehill. But also, you never know when you might find something interesting.
Yeah, in this same conversation, when Oumuamua had come through, right? So this was that extrasolar object that had passed through our solar system in, I think it was like the end of 2018 that it had come through. We talked, or end of maybe 2019, we talked about this on the podcast at one point, but it was a big deal because one Harvard professor had gone out and he said, I looked at all the evidence. None of the evidence makes sense right now at how this object propelled itself faster out of the sun's orbit, like when it flung through, and that acceleration can't currently be explained, so it needs to at least be entertained that this could be a solar sail or some other thing that is not explicable by just a naked object flying through.
Yeah, this is going to sound like a stretch, but I swear it's related to the recent discovery of how wombats poop cubes. You know this?
Wombats poop cubes?
This is amazing.
Wombats poop cubes, and it was inexplicable. Inexplicable for years. And it was just like, I don't know. I guess somehow it worked. And scientists have finally figured it out. And I swear there was this article, we'll share it in the show notes, from CNN talking about how, like, and then theoretically we'll hopefully be able to discover new ways to turn things into cubes. And I was like, wow, true.
Okay.
But the idea that there is an answer, but we, what fills the gap of what that answer could be until then it could be anything.
So one of the things, this is a complete aside, I used to work in the potato industry, and I learned that there are a lot of potato farms out west that grow their potatoes in cubes so that you can slice them into fries and whatnot with less wasted yield.
Right.
It just makes sense. So you just grow them in a little container so that they grow square.
Japanese square watermelons.
Yeah, it's the exact same thing. They're easier to stack, lower on fuel, to transport them into different places. It's just the right way to do it from an economic perspective. But I would love to wander through both of those different fields and just be like, and not know, and just be like, what happened?
What's going on?
What's going on? But I think the inexplicable, the chase for the inexplicable, or just like the need to imagine and be curious is something that, like, I think it's intrinsically human. Like, if it's intrinsically human to organize everything, it's just as intrinsically human to question everything.
I think there's something interesting about in this conversation too, like the stigmatization of curiosity, right? Because like my entertainment factor in this is not going around being like the lizard people are running our government, right? Like it is just purely like this, like entertaining, like, oh, what if it was true? And I think your point, Jess, about like science and the way things are coming up is interesting too, because there's a lot more science now happening around the search for extraterrestrial life and more openness to these things. Last year, there was like a big curiosity in like the astrophysics community around Tabby Star that was like dimming in a way that they couldn't explain. I think it's probably called like Tabby Star X17523 whatever, but it was dimming in a way that they just couldn't understand. It was like they couldn't explain why it was dimming in such a way, and there was a period where the scientists were just like, well, the obvious answers aren't clearing up. Could it be a Dyson sphere, right? Like an object you build around the solar system or around a star to like capture all of its energy. And they like pursued it, and they're like, no, probably not. They eventually got to an answer, but that idea of just being like, well, we can ask the question. Like, it shouldn't be like you're saying, oh, it's definitely a Dyson sphere or whatever. But there's been a lot more wow signals, which are these like bursts, radio bursts from out in the universe or the galaxy. Is originally called the wow signal because the first person who found it like circled it on a piece of paper and just wrote wow exclamation point. And so now it's like these unexplainable radio bursts. But like people are like, now they'll analyze these new ones that they're finding to say like, is there any consistency in the signal, and being like, is this an alien or whatever. But I think the point is like, clearly what we're talking about is there are gateholders or gatekeepers in all of these things where like there's still a permission structure or a fear of like credibility or discredibility to be able to talk about these things. And like science has gone through its own slow journey to get there. But like, it feels like we are in a moment, coming back to the beginning of saying like 3 UFO stories that somehow crossed my radar with me not looking for them in the past month that have like video and whatever. Like, it seems like there's some sort of transition, at least in public discourse, about this stuff now. So that brings us to Jess's UAP corner.
Which could have easily been converted to unidentified flying observation if they were so hell-bent on getting... Yes. Like, why did they have to change the whole thing?
Not necessary. Agreed.
What could have been a conversation about taboos generally was remarkably anchored on aliens, but I think it's not just about entertaining your guilty pleasure, Joey. I think there's clearly something here about why and how can we be talking about things that we don't fully understand, or even a thing we think we fully understand. Are we more comfortable now questioning those things? And it's really interesting to use the case study of science, sci-fi, and beyond to try and pick that apart. Maybe we revisit this question with another industry under the microscope, so to speak, under the Dyson sphere. Did I use it right?
Under the watchful eye of the Hubble telescope.
Oh, I think this season's episode of the last episode of The Expanse is coming out tonight. Oh, wait, this was supposed to be after we were done recording. Sorry, listeners. My bad.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Recorded out there because that is where the truth is.
As always, we'd like to thank Fox Mulder and executive producer and Scully, Jess Vander.
We would also like to thank Jamie Foxx impersonator occasionally when the microphones are off, and sound engineer Alex Contel.
And designer Nora Mestrich for our beautiful everything, and always with 2 eyes up at the stars.
And the production help of Tony Vaughn, Sarah Jacobs, and Les Gilbert, which rings through our souls like a Tina Fey joke in an animated Pixar feature in 2021.
All of that except for Sarah Gilbert and Les Jacobs. And as always, thanks, Elen.
Thank you. Did I say Sarah Jacobs and Les Gilbert?
Yeah.
You did.
That sounds right. That's me. Thank you, my brain, for being
my brain. They got married
brain.
and switched last night.
Yeah. It's WandaVision. I'd like to thank WandaVision, by the way.
Special thanks, WandaVision.
Wait, can we also special thanks to, in this household, the theme song to WandaVision, which, regardless of the episode, is WandaVision. Yes. WandaVision.
It's so good. And they finally, they did the thing. Everybody was like, please get to the
Yeah,
and
right.
They finally got to the and they did it so well. Like,
they did it great.
They've opened.
But you really had. It was like, okay, all right. But like, when does this become a superhero thing?
Right.
I'm like ready for the superhero part.
Because
Can we give a no thank you to the deceptive length of the episodes because there's 8 minutes of credits on every episode?
It pisses me off every time.
And then
I was like, 36 minutes. Nope, just kidding. 28.
Yes,
that's
rude.
Yeah.
Very, very. I would also like to thank. I'm just going in my head on what's on my PS4 because I got to thank it. I'm thanking Shadow of the Colossus, which is a remake that came out years ago, and I've never played it. So I'm going to thank it for being on my system and to be a blanket of fleece for the weekend.
I'm going to thank my wife because we are moving and she is good at things in life.
That's fair.
So.
Thank you, people. You got to thank.
I like to thank foldable toothbrushes.
I'd like to thank Jess's office that she's currently in, that she's just holding up random, very confusing objects this entire episode.
Like
in the
pears.
She's literally recording this in a magician's hat. I'm just hoping you all realize, like, whoa, I'm just David Copperfield over here.
Not only did she present micro spatulas, I'm pretty sure invented micro spatulas while on this episode so that she could present them.
Agreed. I'm really want to join. It's like James and the Giant Peach, except it's David Copperfield's chapeau. Please let us in, Jess, at some point.
That didn't make any sense.
Wait, isn't David Copperfield the magician?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the Charles Dickens.
No, he's the
David
lesser known.
Got it.
We're talking about the one that made the Statue of Liberty disappear on Fox in 1992.
Yeah.
That's what we got.
What
That's
a
good.
resume. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
This is. Nope. I'm going to stop that.
All right.
I'm going to turn
The story
it back.
of a girl. Okay. The story of a Joe. Was that where that was going? Okay, cool.